Okay. Just okay. Welcome, welcome. This is Angel Brown, founder of Heart and Soul Studios, and coming again with another live reading of The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth, written by Monica Shu and Barbara Moore. Um, we last, we're currently on the chapter titled Southeast Europe, the Bird and Snake Goddess. The format of this reading is one where, you can put your headsets in, you can get comfortable, you can do what you need to do while you're listening to this. You can treat it as an audio reading. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. Okay. The goddess religion was carried into the Near East by descendants of the European Old Stone Age. They entered Anatolia via the Bosporus and the Dardanelles Straits, bearing them with countless generations of cultural, social, and spiritual development centered on the worship of the Great Mother. The Balkan region of Southeast Europe, known in the ancient world as Thrace, was one of the sites of this development. It was previously assumed that agriculture and Neolithic culture generally originated in the Near East and spread from there to Europe in the fourth millennium BC. It has now been shown that the movement could have been in the other direction. An independent Neolithic culture existed in Southeast Europe circa 7,000 to 3,500 BC. This matristic culture was similar to those in Anatolian, Near Eastern, and Egyptian regions, but did not derive from them. It is likely that all were seeds dropped on the way of the outward migrations of Paleolithic cave people following the recession of the Ice Age. The Southeast Europeans lived in small townships with laid out streets. They farmed domesticated animals, developed pottery, and used sophisticated bone and stone carving techniques. Located on five seas, the Adriatic, the Ionian, the Aegean, the Marmara, and the Black Sea, these people traded at great distances on seas and inland waterways, transporting many items, including native obsidian, alabaster, and marble. They might have traded obsidian to Katal Hayuk as early as 7,000 BC. The Vinca culture near present Belgrade in Yugoslavia flourished circa 5,300 to 4,000 BC. These people built large settlements of 2 and 3 room houses. 2,000 figurines of the goddess have been found in the excavations. And the first attempts at linear writing appeared there, not later than mid 6th millennium BC, on spindle whorls, figurines, and vessels, all related to women and the goddess. The bird and snake goddess reigned supreme. As archaeologist Marija Gimbutas notes, she was a combined snake and water bird with a long phallic neck, descended from the Magdalenian goddess of the European Stone Age, and she was the feminine principle. In the Vinca houses were sacred corners and domed altars. The altar pieces in the shape of the bird goddess with upraised arms. She wore a bird-beaked wooden mask, the receptacle of invisible forces. While some of her mysteries were enacted in natural caves, miniature replicas of temples have been found showing whole buildings made fantastically in the shape of the bird goddess. The Vinca and surrounding Southeast European cultures were largely destroyed by invaders from the East. These were semi-nomadic pastoralists, Aryan ancestors of the Indo-Europeans who disturbed most of Central and Eastern Europe during the fourth millennium BC. In their aggressive infiltration and settlement, these invaders destroyed a good deal of the goddess culture and incorporated what they could not destroy. They also interbred, producing the mixed Gauls, Celts, Teutons, and other later invaders of Western Europe. Only around the Aegean did the earlier matriarchal European Neolithic culture survive unbroken into the end of the third millennium BC, and on Crete in the form of Minoan culture until the mid-second millennium BC. But Thrace remained a major center, radiating ancient knowledge down to Pythagorean times. In The First Sex, that's a book by Elizabeth Gould Davis, she notes that the classical Greeks found evidence there of an ancient technology far beyond their own. Herodotus wrote, the Thracians dwell amid lofty mountains, clothed with forest and capped by snow. Their oracle is situated upon their highest mountain top, and their prophet is a woman. According to Apuleius, Thrace was the original home of witchcraft, woman wisdom. It was also the home of the nine muses called mountain goddesses by Herodotus, thus the legendary home of magic poetry, the wild and mysterious Maenads. And it was also the homeland of one of the original Amazon tribes, warrior women who later fought in Greece against the patriarchal armies. Davis speculates that Thrace was the germinating center for all the later civilizations of Sumer, Crete, Egypt. In parentheses, they say this may or may not be so. At least it was a strong link between original European goddess cultures and the matriarchal centers of the Neolithic Natufians, Katal Hayuk, Hasalar, and another Anatolian and Near Eastern sites. In Thrace, the goddess was worshipped as the moon. In parentheses, they have Diana and Selene. And the nine muses, or mountain goddesses, were her nine magical aspects. The Maenads were her oracular priestess shamans, custodians of her primal wisdom, and legendary teachers of the Celtic Druids, who worshipped Ceridwen, mountain goddess of inspiration. Orpheus, the mythic poet shaman, came from Thrace. Davis thinks he was murdered by the Maenads for revealing their ritual secrets. Thracian Maenad teaching on the immortality of the soul and the theory of reincarnation influenced Pythagoras as late as the 5th century BC. Some years back, there was an exhibition on Thracian treasures at the British Museum in London. The catalog describes a rich culture in Thrace between 6000 to 4000 BC. This culture belonged to an unknown and mysterious people. Scholars cannot explain it. Walls were made with lath and plaster. Local pottery, gracefully made from its very beginnings, was often brightly colored and richly ornamented. In Thrace, as in Asia Minor, it is images of the mother goddess which predominate in the idols made of clay and bone. About 2800 BC, far-reaching changes took place throughout the Bronze Age, changes which contributed to the disappearance of all graces and this culture and were strongly connected with centralized rule. What is never spelled out is that centralized rule was introduced with patriarchy. Culture declined for hundreds of years, etc., during which the ancient magical science was destroyed and forgotten, and patriarchal rapine ruled. Everywhere in the exhibit where images of the goddess appeared, and there were plenty dated 4000 BC and earlier, she is called an idol or fertility figurine. There was a pottery model of a circular shrine enclosing three huge images of the goddess with arms upraised. There were many goblets and vases decorated with heads of warrior women. Yet the catalog does not once speculate on the meaning of these objects. Instead, one is given plenty of information about patriarchal Thrace in later times. Men had many wives. The women did all the work, both at home and in the fields. The men considered it shameful to till the land, and their noblest occupation was to go to war and to be tattooed. So is our her story, taken from us by male archaeologists and historians posing as objective researchers. The next chapter, entitled The Megalithic Tomb, the Moon and the Stone. Most high Neolithic cultures in the Near East developed gradually from village settlements into city centers around 5000 to 4000 BC. Perhaps this was the golden age in this part of the world, a time of peaceful and creative life in the Jordan Valley, kept alive in later myths and legends. And perhaps the same peaceful, settled existence was ongoing at the same time in other parts of the East, in India, in Africa, in Western Europe. From diggings, we know that the dead were no longer buried deep under the house floors, nor entombed in oven-shaped chambers cut in the rock of caves. Now they were given more monumental habitations in the form of rock chambers or stone structures built on the ground, covered with artificial earth mounds. These are the megalithic tombs or dolmens. The dolmen itself, a chamber formed of great upright stones, roofed with a top stone, was seen as having great healing powers. Stones, shaped by water, wind, the earth, were believed to be the habitation of the goddess. In some stone chambers, the portal stone was carved out to resemble the birth canal. The dead, still buried in fetal position, were placed in the womb of the Great Mother awaiting rebirth. Still later, women, being the farmers, gardeners, and keepers of the grain, buried their dead in great egg-shaped pithoi or clay storage urns under the ground. Always a connection was made between the miraculous growth of the plant from a seed buried in the earth and the dead body, planted also in the earth with the hope of regeneration through her womb powers. The women drew on their daily practical experiences as agriculturists to create elaborate new myths of cyclic birth, death, and resurrection. With the spread of settled agriculture, this new culture and its religious symbols blossomed everywhere: the Middle East, India, through Europe into Scandinavia, Britain, and Spain, the Mediterranean islands, North and West Africa. The ancient primordial symbols remain, but in a much more elaborate and permanent form. The great cosmic mountain mother, who was the mother of wild animals, who was the dark ocean and the night and day sky, begets the silver egg, or fruit of her night sky, the moon. She is both moon and earth. And the ancient bird and snake goddess of water and air begets a daughter, the pregnant earth, goddess of vegetation, the green child. Both mother and daughter are linked with the moon. The massive great mother of the old stone age begins to share her powers with a new goddess, the strong young daughter of agricultural skills ruled by the moon. The moon, as daughter of the great mother, is known as the triple goddess. She presides over all acts of generation, whether physical, intellectual, or spiritual. Her triple aspect expresses the three phases of the moon: waxing, which means growth, full, which means rebirth, and waning, which means periodic death. She is, as the new or waxing moon, the white goddess of birth and growth. She is the full moon, the red goddess of love and battle. She is the old or waning moon, the black goddess of death and divination. These are the three phases of a woman's life, all natural and magical, all magical. Biological phases are also spiritual phases. Transience and immortality are different aspects of the same goddess. The moon, as the daughter fruit of the great mother's sky, expresses the essential unity in perpetual change of her cosmos. Moon and sun are the eyes of the heavenly mother, the all-seeing one. We still talk of heavenly bodies and of stars looking down on us. And we still experience the universe as a larger symbolic body, as macrocosm to microcosm, or as mythic mother to daughter. The three cyclic phases of the ever turning moon should remind us that our minds are not primordially dualistic but structured to flow through changes, always conscious of the one, while experiencing the whole range of diverse psychic manifestations. Mens, the word for mind, is also the word for moon. On ancient images of the goddess, we find the spiral symbol, one end rolling upward and the other downward by the genital triangle. When represented by this double spiral, she is never solely the goddess of fertility, pregnancy, and birth. She is always at the same time goddess of death and the dead. Bearing on her belly the continuous rising and descending spiral, she expresses the constant double motion of the cosmos. In megalithic art, the goddess as giver of life is depicted naturalistically and sensuously. But as ruler over the spirits and the dead, her form stresses the unnatural, the surreal, and the psychic spiritual. She is then figured in weird, fantastic, hermaphroditic, hermaphroditic or phallic shapes. She is hallucinated into composite monster animals like the Sphinx or the later Griffin and the Abraxas, or in a stylized form called the Eye Goddess, she becomes simply a double spiral representing her cosmic magic eyes. This eye goddess design is found on pottery, on statues, on clay, and bone implements all over Near East and Europe. On the New Grange burial mound in County Meath, Ireland, the double spiral marks the main stones. The goddess receives there the first rays of the sun's rebirth on winter solstice, and the same design appears on stones on Malta, Crete, and in Scandinavia, and inside burial chambers through France and Brittany. The eye spirals are often mistakenly called cup and ring marks and assumed by male archaeologists to be sun wheels. Carved in grim relief inside burial mounds in Brittany, the eye goddess stares forward, seeing death and life equally. The funerary mood is expressed in the stylized extraction of her gaze, reducing complex existence to the stark essentials of seeing and the invisible. Nature is both growth and decay, and life cannot be without death. Such is the unblinking vision of the eye goddess. Stone in Neolithic times, as in the Paleolithic, remains the powerful abode of the great goddess. Stone, of all earth forms, is immortal and unchanging, symbol of permanence. As the bones of the earth, the pelvic walls of caverns, it gives off a profound vibration or resonance, both subhuman and supernatural. All primitive people carry wishbones and healing stones, talismans painted with magic symbols. Animals as well as humans seem drawn to tall, standing menhirs or stone pillars. Sick livestock rub against them in the countryside, and it is timeless folk custom to touch menhirs in order to become fertile or to be cured of illness. Legends often refer to stone circles as nine maidens or merry maidens. Nine is the magic number of the moon and the Thracian muses. To explain these circles, it is said that nine naughty young women were turned into stone by the avenging Christian god. Let me say that again. To explain these circles, it is said that nine naughty young women were turned into stone by the avenging Christian god for dancing on his Sabbath. It has been suggested that a specific number of women slash girls dancing in a circle at certain speeds and all singing or humming the appropriate note, in parentheses, young women having high piping voices, might set up a vibratory resonance in the stone circle, subjecting each stone to a burst of sound energy as each woman passed it, and this energy traveling from stone to stone. The ultrasound in the voices or music would act on the crystal structure of the stone. It has recently been found that the quartz content of such stones is an electrically active crystal, and that certain standing stones associated with the stone circles generate ultrasound when stimulated by the elements in the electromagnetic spectrum radiated by the sun at dawn. In England, geologists and ley line hunters, in parentheses, she says, why hunter? Why not seeker? But yeah, in England, geologists and ley line hunters are working together in the Dragon Project, physically monitoring and measuring radiation and energies emanating from standing stones and stone circles. At different times of day and night, lunar and solar risings and settings, and at different seasons. In Neolithic times, the moon and the stone symbols were combined in one characteristic shape, the horned altar. Anything shaped like a crescent moon was considered by analogy to belong to the triple goddess. Thus, where horses' hooves struck crescent marks on the earth, the moon ran, and the wild mare belonged to her. The curving lunar horns of cows and bulls, goats, oxen, and other herd animals were held sacred and adorned. And the horned crown became the magic adornment of warriors, rulers, and priests of the late Neolithic. Horned Teutonic warrior women and the horned Pan, pagan god of nature, Pan means all, belonged to this tradition. And this is why the Christian devil is depicted wearing horns. From Upper Paleolithic times, we have the Venus of Lhasa and other cave images of women wearing or holding horns and figurines of horns with women's breasts. There were also images of the pregnant doe and her magic antlers. Northern hunting people still see the mother of the universe as a doe, elk, or wild reindeer. There are myths of pregnant women who rule the heart of the world, covered with hair and with branching deer's horns on their heads. The deer was still sacred to Artemis and Diana, goddesses of the moon, in later times. The doe's udders were seen to be sources of rainwater, and the growth of her antlers was magically connected with the growth of the crescent moon, both symbolizing growth and regeneration. The symbol of the Sumerian goddess of childbirth was a stag. Apparently, there was a synchronicity between the growth cycle of the stag's antlers and that of spring-grown Neolithic cereal gains. In later Celtic and Teutonic myth, the fairly transformed, I'm sorry, the fairy transformed herself most commonly into a magic deer, and she lived within an earth mound, the pregnant womb of the goddess. A whole complex of symbols is associated with this Neolithic religion of the great goddess. The sacred pillar, the horns, the cosmic snake and egg, the labyrinth, the world tree, the dove, the swastika, the sacrificial double axe or labrys, the bee, the butterfly, and the chrysalis. The horned altar, the cow's horns, shaped in stone or clay, the likeness of the young crescent moon, stood for new growth and fertility. It also meant the simultaneously waning crescent, the dying moon. These altars are found in megalithic tombs, but agricultural rites of the horned altar were also performed for the living group. Just as earlier Paleolithic people had performed magic cave rituals to encourage the birth and capture of the hunter's animal quarry. In the settled Neolithic, where people depended on cultivated crops, the seasons, and the weather, horned altar ceremonies were enacted to help the rebirth of the new moon, to assist crop growth and harvest, to renew the fertility of the fields each year. So, bringing about the resurrection of the daughter vegetable life through the Mother Earth and Moon. When plowing developed, it was a part of funerary rites. The sacred pillar, along with the horned altars, were sacred stone objects standing in the open country, along roads, and in the village. Also, descended from the Old Stone Age, they were phallic pillars with the Great Mother carved on them. Stone pillars with breasts are found throughout the Near East, As Gimbutas suggested, these ancient phallic mother stones symbolized shamanic bisexuality and the unity of the sexes, a Neolithic ideal stressed in ritual and imagery. The cosmic snake and egg derive from the original goddess cosmology and continue to represent wisdom, immortality, continuity within change, and the magic germ or still heart center within the whirling negative positive spiral field of cosmic energy. The labyrinth also continues the earlier Paleolithic rituals of the underground cave, the initiation maze dance through life and death. Serpent and maze designs are common symbols on Neolithic pottery worldwide, and in urban times, they are incorporated in floor mosaics. In Neolithic Western Europe and in Neolithic North America, giant burial mounds were built in the shape of serpents with spirals engraved on their stones. The world tree is another worldwide symbol, found everywhere among Neolithic agricultural people. The world tree also existed among earlier Old Stone Age hunting and gathering cultures. Shamans in trance climb the world tree, which is the human spine and the spine of the world, to receive illumination. The Neolithic world tree appears in a garden abundant with fruit and grains. It reflects the agricultural concerns of settled people when the energy bonds between human society and the cycles of vegetable life were stressed and also coming under human control. The world tree incorporates serpentine and lunar symbolism, shedding bark and leaves like skin or light, being reborn in the spring, growing rhythmically with the monthly moon phases. At least 2,000 years before the Hebrew patriarchs wrote of the Garden of Eden, the Neolithic great goddess had her magic garden of immortality. Clay seals and figurines from Sumer and Crete show her sitting in her garden. The branches of the world tree overspreading bundles of fruits and grains, a crescent moon over her shoulder, and somewhere twined around the tree trunk or stretched on the ground feet. In some fertilizing rivers, meander lines pour in from the four directions. Such images of peaceful abundance are the apotheosis of the Neolithic. The dove is often pictured there too, perched in the world tree as the symbol of the great mother's all-giving love. In parentheses, as the vulture meant all-taking death. Doves continued through Roman times to be the companions of the love goddess, Venus, as well as biblical symbols of peace. In the image of the cosmic tree penetrating the tree, I'm sorry, in the image of the cosmic tree penetrating the three sacred zones of heaven, earth, and underworld, the threefold structure of the universe is expressed. Also, the threefold structure of the human brain, the original reptilian brain stem, surrounded by the mammalian cerebrum, and all enveloped by the human neocortex. The reptile brain is the secret dream underground. The mammal brain is abundant earth. The human neocortex is the flying bird who sits in the world tree and can climb the sky. Wherever bird and snake appear together, as in the Thracian bird and snake goddess, they are to be seen as the upper and lower symbols of the world tree. And it is understood that the world tree, which is the spine, the arousal of Kundalini through the chakras, connects them. In the presence of this Neolithic world tree symbol, one is in the presence of the most ancient shamanistic trance power and of yoga. Both are magic techniques of the Great Mother. In the Hebrew Genesis, Eve and Adam are driven from the Garden of Immortality by Yahweh because they consort with the cosmic serpent under this magic world tree. The Genesis tree was not an apple, but a fig tree. Eve and Adam cover their nakedness with fig leaves after eating of its fruit in Eden. Hathor, the cow goddess of Egypt, was anciently identified with the fig tree, which was known as the living body of Hathor on earth. To eat of its sweet, pulpy fruit, its very vulva-like fruit, was to eat of her flesh and fluid. The fig tree was also sacred on Crete, considered the food of eternity and immortality. The biblical Garden of Eden was, in fact, the entire Near Eastern, North African, and Mediterranean Neolithic agricultural world of the great goddess. And the forbidden tree and evil serpent represented her ancient magic powers of illumination and immortality and earthly peace. The swastika is one of the most ancient abstract symbols. It is found scratched on Siberian clay figures of wild geese on the underside of their wings from the earliest Neolithic excavations. The cross originally represented the earth, the Great Mother's body, her outstretched arms, the four directions. The swastika means the earth in flight. It is the cross with feet or wings set in motion. The earth and its moon are wheeled through their changes. Later seen as a sun wheel, the swastika was first a moon wheel, and like the double crescent, the labrys, it could signify both directions of the cosmic spin, into creation or dissolution. The right spinning wheel, clockwise, was used to build, encourage, maintain. The left spinning wheel, counterclockwise, was used to destroy, prevent, or transform the nature of something. Just so, the witch cycle turns clockwise to do, widdershins to undo. The swastika can be found worldwide from old relics dug up in Iran to the pottery decorations of present-day Zuni Indians in the American Southwest. Typically, as on a 7th century BC terracotta amphora from Boeotia and other statues and pots from the Aegean, the swastika was associated with the Lady of the Beasts, the new Stone Age version of the Paleolithic mother of wild animals. It is one of the magic signs of the foot of the Buddha. Taken over by patriarchy, the swastika has meant only destruction. Hitler read it as an Aryan fire sign. The double axe, or labrys, was the instrument used by women in their ceremony, agricultural work, and battle. It is an axe with two heads, the two moon crescents, waxing and waning. A practical version was used by women in daily agricultural work. In the form of the battle axe, it was used by Amazonian warriors of North Africa, Thrace, and Macedonia, and the Caucasus. As a sacred sacrificial axe, it could be used only by priestesses who alone could cut down the goddess's ceremonial trees. Our word labyrinth comes from the Minoan labyrinth. It refers to the hall of double axes, or labyrinth, dug up by archaeologists at the Palace of Knossos on Crete. Crete was the great matriarchal cultural center of the Mediterranean. Its murals and mosaics, pottery designs, seals, and amulets show the labyrinth wielded only by women, and it appears extensively as an icon symbol of the great goddess. The bee was always a sign. Honey was the only sweetener of the ancient world, and its maker, the honeybee, is both industrious and magical. Only the female bees build hives and make honey, and they communicate with each other via dance language. Bees appear in the spring at the rebirth of grasses and flowers. The goddess was also pictured as chrysalis and butterfly, who emerges from its self-spun tomb totally transformed. As the bird once emerged from the reptile, and as the new soul emerges from ritual death on wings of illumination. The butterfly is like the cowrie shell, a vulva symbol. According to Marija Gimbutas, the butterfly winged goddess was slowly merged with the double axe image during the Bronze Age. The megalithic tomb was the body of the Great Mother. It was her temple where religious rites were performed at night by the light of her moon. The stone menhirs were designated as females, colossal, upright blocks, some 10 feet high and often grouped in threes. They embodied the triple goddess of birth, death, and rebirth and were associated throughout the Neolithic with vast circles marked out by stones, which were ritual enclosures and sacred dance grounds. These stone circles, or the traces of them, are found worldwide. The rites enacted in the menhir circles represented the spiritual understanding of the Neolithic people, their wish for union with the goddess and for immortality through her. The ceremonies were presided over by women shaman priestesses whose spheres were vision, sacrifice, poetic and magic lore, the ritual calendar and the law, and astrological observation. The later Druids inherited much of their knowledge, lore, and ritual. These priestesses were also healers, rainmakers, midwives, and the keepers of Soma, the sacred mind expanding drink. Beehive tombs with passage entranceways have been found from Greece to Ireland, dating from the close of 3000 BC. All have huge circular enclosures, amphitheaters for funerary games. Their entrances are ornamented with 8 double spirals, the circle that has no end, the point that breathes itself into a universe and back again. On Crete, cult shrines enclosing small stone pillars or clay pillars molded around tree trunks were set up to ceremonialize the dead in the magic tomb. The Egyptian pyramids were an elaborate culmination of the megalithic tomb guarded by the giant Sphinx, who is the goddess, guardian of the dead. Next chapter, the Earth Mound as cosmic womb of the pregnant goddess. Silbury Hill, situated on the Wiltshire Downs in southwest England, is the largest surviving image of the goddess from Neolithic Europe. It is 520 feet in diameter and 130 feet high, and it is over 4,500 years old. For hundreds of years, male archaeologists have been excavating the mound, desperately hoping to find within it the Bronze Age burial remains of an ancient Essex king. But as Michael Dames points out in Silbury Treasure, the great goddess rediscovered, Neolithic culture was based on kinship, not kingship. In Dame's view, the Silbury Mound expresses a vision of cosmic unity long lost to patriarchy. Silbury Hill was the primordial belly, the omphalos or navel of the world. The sacred mountain emerged from the waters of chaos, the world egg born from the primordial sea of night. It is the throne who is the squatting goddess, the white mountain, the navel of waters. The Indo-European root for heel, in parentheses, they have the word Kel, Kel, also meant a concealed sacred place and was in Germanic, it was called Hali or Haljo, 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 and was probably related to Halig, meaning holy. The mountain was always a generator of energy, inspiring the high state of madness and prophecy, giving oracular powers. It is the world axis where the different levels of psychic physical experience interpenetrate, the threshold between underworld, earth, and sky from which all creation emerges. From the mountain, the shaman begins his or her ecstatic journey. In Britain, there are 1,500 hilltops with large enclosures on their summits, encircled by earthen banks. These earthworks look like coiled serpents and were used as ritual mazes. According to Michael Dames, Silbury Hill contains a vegetable core surrounded by layers of chalk, gravel, soil, and clay. Radiating from this core at spokes are spokes of twisted string looking like umbilical cords or snakes. This central axis is surrounded by sarsen stones, which are covered with earth dug from the surrounding quarry, originally filled with water. The surface of the mother's body was water, and she contained within herself earth, water, air, and fire, sunlight reflected in the moat. The heel and its ditch, a convex heel and concave hole, create together the image of the goddess squatting in the Neolithic birth position, tranquil and stable, ready to give birth to the world. The Neolithic farming communities had a nonlinear sense of time, believing that time began anew with each new year. The pregnant mountain mother gave birth in August when the seeds, spring planted in her womb, had grown large. At the same time, the entire community came to be with her. The divine birth is the harvest of the wheat, and the first fruits were offered to the goddess. Similar mysteries were enacted in Eleusis around Demeter, the grain mother. In Britain, she was known as Bride Anna or Danu, and she was celebrated on her womb slash mounds in August as late as 17th century AD. Great assemblies of witches traditionally gathered on Lammas Eve, which is August 1st, the people believing that their welfare in the coming year depended on the performance of these sacred rites of the corn mother or harvest queen. The Christian church throughout Britain finally took drastic action against this pagan cult worship. The Christian priesthood preaches linear, not cyclic time, hoping to separate man from the goddess of nature and God from the great cosmic rhythms of creation. Okay. The Christian church throughout Britain finally took drastic action against this pagan cult worship. The Christian priesthood preaches linear, not cyclic time, hoping to separate man from the goddess of nature and God from the great cosmic rhythms of creation. As many wise people have observed, the way to control human life is to control the rhythm of life. Pagan life was ruled by natural cyclic rhythms. The church opposed these female rhythms with linear historic ones, thus trying to change human rhythm from natural to mechanical, which serves the industrial process but leaves human life and labor, including agricultural life and labor, quite alienated. As Dames says, both lunar and solar phenomena, particularly the solstices and equinoxes, were studied by the late Neolithic farming communities who used a solar calendar to determine annual agricultural events, while the months, from the word moon, and the daily rhythms were linked to the more ancient lunar calendar. In the ancient world, the full moon was birth time for all life. The ceremonial birth at Silbury was celebrated on the night of the full moon closest to the fixed solar quarter day or Sabbat of Lammas. Silbury hills drew up power or water from the underworld, sorry, and drew down power or light from the sky. When these elements were joined within her earth body, the universal birth took place. The birth and death of light could be witnessed from her summit, both occurring at the same moment as the sun rose and the moon set, and after 12 hours, the reverse. All equinoctial settings of sun and full moon, according to Dames, mark the positions of the goddess's moat eye. At Silbury, the interaction between the hill mother and the river mother is one and bisexual. The moon is born from the water and gives birth on the water. The goddess at Silbury is also the eye goddess, as the moon and sunlight are reflected in the moat, an image of the indivisibility of mind and matter, eye and womb, as well as their transformation through the womb. When death was formed by the mother, everything was both dead and alive in process by nature. Earth was seen in its totality, and the people recognized death as one of the sources of first fruit ceremonies. This was the psychic orientation of pagan agriculturalists long before, in Dane's words, war was declared on the human body with the emergence of patriarchal warrior societies in the Bronze Age. Silbury Hill is comparable to the temples on Malta. To sleep within such a goddess shape would itself have been a ritual act. Recent excavations in the Orkney Islands of Scotland have revealed whole Neolithic villages, up to 60 houses, designed in the shape of a goddess body. Individual houses made of stone and mud on Skara Brae are shaped like uteruses with vaginal entranceways. Stone temples in Malta are carved and built in the shape of the massive Paleolithic Great Mother. And small clay figurines of the great goddess in this same form are found throughout Malta. The West Kennet Long Barrow in England is built in the same identical shape. The large Medamud temple in Egypt and the Bryn Celli Dew Mound in Wales are the same body. The great earth mound belly, open thighs of stone, the entrance portal open for the passage of birth and death. Worldwide, architecture was the mother of arts as women built to live within her body shape. Dogon villages in Africa are constructed in the shape of a bisexual human figure lying on its back. The village represents the first vibration of the cosmic egg. It is built in the center of fields cut in spirals. At the southern end is a cone-shaped shrine, the penis. A hollowed stone nearby on which the fruit is pressed for oil is the vagina. Minstrel huts to the east and west sides of the village are hands. Both sexes carry out the agricultural work of these bisexual villages. Primal people understand quite clearly that the shape of one's dwellings is the shape of one's life. The white goddess of pagan Britain was the mother of the good and fertile soil of the chalklands, white as the full moon. All her creation, including stones and minerals, was organic and animated. Her body permeated all the later Avebury monuments on the Wiltshire Downs. This area is rich in sarsen stones, massive blocks of hard sandstone, which lay on the surface of the hills and didn't need to be quarried. These stones were called bride stones. Bride, Bridget in parentheses, was one of the goddess's names. The white horse, a large turf-cut figure on the hillside at Uffington in Berkshire, is an evocation of Eponia, the Celtic horse goddess. Dragon Hill nearby was a Neolithic first fruits ceremonial site. Folklore tells that the white sterile patch on its summit was caused by the execution of the life-giving dragon goddess at the hands of a patriarchal solar hero. Where her blood fell, nothing will grow. One such dragon slayer or serpent killing hero is Saint Michael. Many of the earliest Christian churches in Britain dedicated to Saint Michael were built precisely on the ancient mounds and high places of the great goddess. In Christian lore, Saint Michael was the head chief of a band of angels, read patriarchal invaders, that went to war with the mother dragon and her people. In folklore, Saint Michael is thought to be the successor of Wotan, the Anglo-Saxon god who was a warlike slayer of dragons. In fact, an abnormal number of Christian churches dedicated to Saint Michael and Saint George, the other British dragon slayer, are built on high places along the ley line or the dragon path that runs from Land's End in Cornwall through the goddess monuments at Glastonbury and Avebury in southwest England. Such a St. Michael's church was built on the summit of Glastonbury Tor. But in the year 1300 AD, it was destroyed by an earthquake. As Elizabeth G. Davis notes, all the Christian male angels were originally the great goddess with her wings. When the image of the winged goddess continued to be engraved on Roman coins in defiance of the new Christian hierarchy in Con- Constantinople, Constantinople, who had smashed or taken over all her Roman temples, the church fathers just changed her name to the Angel of the Lord, Archangel Michael. Glastonbury Tor is a spiral mound with a processional way, along which a dance was performed by the community, circling around and up to the top. Glastonbury means glass castle. Glass castles in Welsh, Irish, and Manx legend were island shrines or star prisons ruled by the white moon goddess of poetry and ritual death. In medieval legend, they were made of glass. In Neolithic time, there were goddess mounds of birth and death. Original rites at Glastonbury were aimed at restoring the bird and flower life of spring, perhaps. The mound was a magnetic center for the absorption and refraction of generative energies to which animal, bird, and plant life responded. And women, as the ancient farmers and beekeepers, performed the rites. Glastonbury was probably the enchanted Isle of Avalon. Lands flowing with milk and honey, eulogized in the Bible as original Edens, were in fact the lands of the Neolithic goddess. Milk belongs to the mother. And since women were the first beekeepers, the honeybee has always symbolized matriarchy. Mm. Wait. Lands flowing with milk and honey, eulogized in the Bible as original Edens, were in fact the lands of the Neolithic goddess. Milk belongs to the mother. And since women were the first beekeepers, the honeybee has always symbolized matriarchy. North African and Thracian Amazons legendarily fed on honey and mare's milk, along with blood, raw meat, and reed marrow. The Indo-Europeans inherited beekeeping from the Minoans of Crete, who practiced it from the beginning of the Neolithic. Cretans believed that at the death of the sacrificial bull, the goddess was reborn as a bee. Thus, the bull-born goddess of transformation and regeneration, both bee and bull, belong to the moon. The bull, because of its crescent horns, while the bees make the sweet light of honey within the night darkness of the hive. At Ephesus, where the many-breasted Artemis Diana was worshipped, the bee appeared as her cult animal. Her temple at Ephesus was a symbolic beehive built by priestesses and known as one of the wonders of the ancient world. Her priestesses were called Melissa, bees, and the eunuch priestesses were Essenes, or drones. Thus, the beehive shape of so many Neolithic earth mounds was quite intentional and symbolic. Beekeeping was a metaphor for settled agriculture and for the peaceful abundance of the earth in those times. And the honeybee was like the full moon, making illumination in the night. In Ireland, in Brittany and Wales, and in Scandinavia, the fairies, with their fairy queen, are still believed to be living in earth mounds or tomb dwellings. The Swedish sagas about trolls are obviously distorted tales about ancient moon worshipping people. The trolls are said to live inside mountains, to be dressed in skins, to eat human flesh, to exist in both human and animal form, and to die if caught in the rays of the sun. They live by night, by moonshine. So in Ireland, the fairy people said to live inside the burial mounds are Tuatha de Danann, people of the goddess Danu, displaced and driven underground by later patriarchal invaders. The Dananns were matrilinear, and their goddess was the mother of all magic, art, and craft. Halloween was originally Samhain, one of the four great cross-quarter days or sabbats of the witch year in pagan Britain. Originally, on this night of All Souls, priestess oracles sat at the stone portals of earth mounds or mass burial chambers while the spirits of the heroic dead passed in and out, visiting the world just once before the great death of winter. In North America, Neolithic farming cultures also built earth mounds. The earliest, dating from 1000 BC, were found throughout the southeast by early explorers from Florida and Georgia into West Virginia, Kentucky, and the Tennessee Valley, and west into Arkansas and Oklahoma. Ohio was the site of two great mound building Native American cultures. The Adena, dating circa 800 BC to AD 900, built conical mounds. The Hopewell, 600 BC to AD 1500, elaborated on the earlier structures, building huge mounds and earthen embankments covering hundreds of acres. Both these cultures built burial mounds. Later, people in the southeast built temple mounds, large earthworks with temples on the top, but no burial chambers within. Ohio is the site of the Great Serpent Mound of the Adena culture. The Serpent Mound is 1,400 feet long, made of earth in the shape of a snake winding around a cosmic egg, the maternal ovum. Many American Indian cultures were not mound builders, but most believe their ancestors emerged from such mounds or from some such structure, symbolizing the earth's pregnant belly. The Hopi and other Southwest tribes still go into kivas or underground chambers for initiation into the presence of the earth spirit. And the great periods of Mexico and Central America were built up generation after generation over original earth mound structures. Mexico means navel of the moon. Next chapter, the islands of Malta and Gozo. On the islands of Malta and Gozo in the Mediterranean can be seen the clearest connection between the cave, the tomb, and the temple, all three being the body of the Great Mother. Sometime in the third or millennium BC, or maybe earlier, an incredibly advanced culture developed on these small and isolated islands, which, situated between Sicily and the Libyan coast, were really right at the center of the ancient world. Malta and Gozo were an ancient sacred center for the religion of the Great Mother. From Europe, from Africa, and from the Aegean and the Near East, pilgrims traveled here and the sick came to be healed. Over a period of perhaps 1,000 years, up to 30 huge megalithic temple structures were built on these islands. But there are no remains of houses. Only the caves show any trace of habitation. The amazing architecture of the temples was far beyond its time. Pottery and carvings are found in the ruins, but there is a complete absence of metal, the only tools being rough stone implements and the horns of oxen and goats. Perhaps there was a religious taboo on the use of metal. No weapons were made or used on the islands. Metallurgy began, in fact, as a sacred technology of the goddess. Only ceremonial metals were cast at first. There was much taboo around the use of metals, no doubt, secrecy about smelting methods. Pagan European witches and Native Americans share an ancient belief that metal interferes with magic. These were stone-oriented people who felt metals blocking and distorting psychic, spiritual energy currents. Witches were not supposed to touch iron. Guy Underwood, a British water diviner, says his experiences have shown him that placing a metal object on a blind spring obliterates for a short time all geodetic reactions around it. Water is extremely sensitive to metals, especially heavy metals. The Malta and Gozo temples imitated the rock cult megalithic tombs of the mainland. They were built in roundish chambers in cloverleaf and crescent designs around an inner courtyard with long connecting courtyards between them. No dead were buried in these temples. Bodies were still interred in caves and rock-cut tombs, but there was only a step from performing ceremonial rites at the cave tombs to building special temples for the veneration of the spirits of the dead. The temples were built with enormous double walls, rubble and earth piled in the space between the inner and outer wall. So, in effect, the temple was still inside the earth, as inside a mountain, surrounded by powerful earth currents, similar to a Reichian organ chamber, in fact. In myth, Gozo was the island realm of Calypso, the daughter of Uranus. It was on Gozo that the patriarchal hero Ulysses was believed to have stayed enchanted by the sorceress Calypso for 7 years. In myth, the huge temple of Nganteja, 4th millennium BC, was built by a giant Titan woman with a baby at her breast. Single-handedly, in one day, she hauled the huge blocks of stone to the building site and built the temple walls by night. This temple is 90 feet high, and some of its great stone slabs measure 5 yards by 4 yards. Mortar was used on the inside walls, which were then painted with red ochre, the color of rebirth. Some of the megaliths weighed 50 tons, and stone rollers that must have been used to transport the huge blocks have been found by the temple site. The entire population of the island must have worked during many generations to produce this single temple. What were they seeking? What were they seeking? Probably what we could call the living darkness, the stillness of the tomb, the breathing silence of the womb of the earth mother. The chambers, painted blood red, had no sharp angles. All the shapes are rounded or molded in curves and waves. There was no worship of the heavens in these temples and no human sacrifice. There are traces only of animal sacrifice and the pouring of libations. Here, the living and dead were as close as possible to each other. But the strangest thing is that the temple on the surface of the earth was only the entrance to a still vaster shrine beneath. Legends tell of a huge labyrinth, catacomb, or rock necropolis built under the temple, a city of the dead, in which the whole island population ultimately resided. In fact, an enormous labyrinthine cave sanctuary has been found, the collective burial tomb of 7,000 bodies. This mass tomb was built in several stories out of the subterranean rock. At its entrance is a trilithon gateway giving access to the underground city, the abode of the perfect ones. Long vaulted corridors, blood-stained with red ochre, led to a sacred deep temple area. With its altars, pillars, gateway, and spiral designs painted in red on the roof, it mirrored or echoed the temple built above ground. This was the center of something, as Malta and Gozo are indeed at the geographic center of the Neolithic Great Goddess culture, stretching from Africa to Scandinavia, from Sumeria to Spain, or to the sunken continent of Atlantis, some believe. In this sacred space, priestesses of the Great Goddess contacted the spirits of the dead, consulted oracles, prophesied, and performed ritual healing. In the temple are huge squatting images of the goddess. These are the same bulging, rounded shape as the temple. In later images, she wears a flounced skirt with small figurines hiding in it for protection. She holds her arm raised to her breast. Her head is smaller proportionately than the body and made of a separate material, and she wears a blissful expression, peaceful, gracious, and still. She meditates with closed eyes sitting on a throne, and she has small, delicate hands. The blood of sacrificed animals was poured into a stone vessel with a hollow base standing on the altar, and burning fire ceremonies were also enacted. These secret chambers of the Great Mother were where timeless mysteries were performed, are guarded by her eyes, the cosmic symbol of the double spiral inscribed on the ceiling stone. Plant, flower, and animal motifs are carved in relief on the walls and altars, and they show strong Cretan influence, evidence of much contact between these islands. The temples were also healing centers. The sick came to sleep in the huge stone chambers. Priestesses in clairvoyant sleep listened to the voices of the underworld. Divination and also acoustic conjuring were practiced. The priestess's disembodied voice from her little chamber hidden in the thick walls reverberated through the vaults via clay pipes and moldings, seeming the voice of earth itself. People came on pilgrimage to sleep in the temple, to have dream communion with the powers of the underworld and the dead, to obtain counsel, wisdom, healing, and clairvoyant knowledge of the future. The temples contain two small figurines of sleeping women, sleeping to dream, to die, to wait for birth and rebirth. They echo the huge pregnant shape of her who was both impersonal and kind, both familiar and terrible, the earth embodying cosmic strength, misery, abundance, paradox. We don't know anything about the people who built these island temples. They were weaponless and so defenseless against warlike pirates who overran them using metal weapons. These conquerors probably came by way of Sicily, bringing a culture much inferior to that of Malta. They still practiced some form of goddess worship, but they burned their dead, showing that they were in transition from matriarchal to patriarchal orientation since the Sky Father, worshiping nomads from the east, also practiced cremation, i.e., they sent the body spirit up to the sky rather than returning it to the earth womb. It is quite possible that Malta and Gozo were schools for priestesses. Such island schools are common in legend. Ancient Celtic myth tells of sacred islands inhabited and ruled by women, where the mysteries were kept and taught. According to Irish texts, the Tuatha De Danann came from such an island in the north, where they had learned science, magic, art, and ancient wisdom from priestesses of the goddess Danu. Druids were buried in ceremonial groves on distant islands. According to the Roman Pomponius Mela, facing the Celtic coast lie a group of islands which take the collective name of Castorites. Sina, off of the Breton coast. It was renowned for its Gallic oracle, whose priestesses, sacred for their everlasting virginity, was said to be 9 in number. These priestesses were called Galicians and had magic powers. To unleash the winds and storms by their spells, to metamorphose in any animal according to their whim, to cure all disease said to be incurable, and finally, to know and predict the future. But they reserved their remedies and predictions exclusively to those who traveled over the sea expressly to consult them. They were 9 in number because 9 is the triplicity of 3, the sacred number of the moon goddess. Girls who were to become priestesses were chosen at the age of 9. 9 priestesses are pictured dancing around an Ithalic young man in a cave painting at Kogel in northeastern Spain, dating from the Old Stone Age Aurignacian period. Arranged in a crescent, the dancing 9 represent the moon's phases, growing older in a clockwise direction. 3 young girls, 3 strong grown women, 3 thin dark crones. The oldest with an old moon face dances widdershins counterclockwise. This painting could be 30,000 years old. So primordial is witchcraft. On the sacred island of Avalon, Apple Island, Morgan Le Fay, the fairy, ruled over 9 sisters and taught how plants can be used to cure illnesses. She knew the art of changing her outward form and could fly through the air with the aid of magic feathers. She was one of many renowned shamans practicing ancient women's wisdom on an enchanted island. The temples of Malta and Gozo reveal that such legends were based on reality, as legends usually are. All that remains of the Maltese island people are their resonant stone temples, but their religious ideas and rites were similar to those surviving in the mystery cults of classical Greece. Such survivals show that early Christianity's belief in the body's immortality grew from very deep and ancient pre-Indo-European, pre-patriarchal roots. Delphi was another oracular shrine tomb. Located on the Greek mainland, it was ruled over by a spiraling python serpent and a prophetic priestess who served Gaia, the earth death mother. The python was housed in Omphalos, or navel shrine, the navel of the earth, built underground in beehive shape, originally perhaps deriving from the African masabo, or ghost house. The name Delphi comes from Delphine, the great snake of the mother. The goddess's most ancient name at Malta had been Delphine, since she was part serpent, and the name comes from the ancient word Delphis, meaning womb, and is now the brand name of a contraceptive foam. Apollo, the patriarchal sun god of classic Greece, was a mythological latecomer to the oracular shrine at Delphi throughout or Delphi, though now he is always associated with it. Apollo began as an underground oracular hero, in fact, and his name means Apple Man. In classic myth, he could not rule at Delphi until he had slain the sacred python with his arrows, or phallic sunbeams, as Zeus had also killed the dragon offspring of the earth goddess at Dodona. But even after the slaying of the symbolic python, the prophetic Sibyl at Apollo's Delphi remained a woman. Bending over her tripod, inhaling smoke and entering trance, she pronounced her judgments on past, present, and future acts of the Greeks. But Apollo, as harbinger of patriarchal sun god technology, increased the production demand on the oracle beyond her endurance and human capacity, driving her mad. As John Mitchell has noted, the same policy of artificially inducing and mechanically increasing the Earth's fertility, attempting to mass produce Earth's fruits for profit rather than accepting what is given organically by nature, can be found wherever the solar gods assumed management over the ancient shrines of the goddess. Blood was used in the Delphic shrine to feed the ghosts and make them return, to speak and prophesy through the Sibyl. The Sibyl drank the blood, producing in herself prophetic ecstasy. Sounds of peepings and mutterings and eerie bat-like voices speaking through her were believed to be the voices of ghosts. This was the function of ancient human and animal sacrifice. The recently dead were more easily recalled from the other world and not so potentially dangerous as those long dead. Through these dead confidants, the priestess gained knowledge of healing and the future. The bull, with its lunar horns, was associated with the underground rituals. Bull's blood was believed to be the most potent magic, and diluted with water, it was used to fertilize the fields and orchards of Crete and Greece. Drunk straight, it was considered a deadly poison to anyone but the Sibyl or priestess of the goddess. Archaically, bull sacrifice took place in a ritual circle of 12 stone herms or pillars at the foot of a sacred hill. Half the bull's blood was sprinkled on the 13th herm in the circle's center. The rest was poured into a large basin from which the priestess drank. The Celts also used bull's blood for divination. Irish poets had to drink bull's blood and then lie down to dream in order to tell the truth. The next chapter, 12 Circling Dancers. Again and again, in the religion of the Great Mother, one comes across 12 dancers in a circle. Even the passion that I revealed to thee and the others in the round dance, I would have it called a mystery. These are supposedly the original words of Christ, leading the 12 apostles in a hymn to the biblical Father. And the following comes from the Gnostic round dance taken from the apocryphal Acts of St. John. And we all circled round him, her, and responded to him, her, amen. The 12th of the number spaces, the round aloft, amen. To each and all it is given to dance, amen. Both the dance and the number 12 are taken from the original goddess religion, the old religion, as witches and pagans would say. Everything alive in Christianity, especially its heresies, is taken from the old religion. Within the witches' covens, there are 12 members and a high priestess. Women and men in alternating positions dance around the magic circle that has been drawn on the ground or floor and blessed by the high priestess. The witches take their sacrament and jump over the holy fire to stimulate the life-giving energies of the moon. The witches, or Wiccan, which means wise ones, practice an ancient women's religion, the Dianic cult, whose rites and beliefs are passed down directly from the earliest Paleolithic and Neolithic religions. It has apparently been determined that the secret language used now in the covens is Neolithic Basque. Very interesting, since Basque is believed to be a remnant of the language used in Atlantis. During the Christian Inquisition and witch hunts, which went on for over 5 centuries, the Wiccan chose hideous torture and death at the stake rather than forego their ancient ways inherited from the beginning of things. They believed that the fertility of the countryside and the health of the people, pagan means peasant, depended upon the performance of their sacred rites. They also knew they were involved with the irreducible truth, the unimprovable original. In a Neolithic cave located in Sacromonte, Spain, 13 skeletons, all in priestess dress and holding amulet bundles, were found. They sat in a circle and apparently had participated in a ritual death. The floor was strewn with beads and seeds of the opium poppy. The high priestess wore a leather tunic engraved with geometric symbols. We don't know why they chose to die in this cavern north of Granada, but they were sister members of the world's oldest religion. On Crete, the sacred ring dances were performed. Naked women dancers, arms linked, circled within an area enclosed by the sacred horns of consecration. Perhaps they danced to raise the Kundalini powers, the collective free flow of their mental, biological, and spiritual energies directed at a common task or vision. The dance is a recreation of the goddess's original cosmic dance of creation, clockwise, and dissolution, counterclockwise. We don't know what kind of power was generated by these dances, but we can guess. Some other form of energy, real technological power, can be produced by tapping the terrestrial and cosmic energy currents and consciously directing their flow. When psychic powers, body, mind, and spirit, are correctly concentrated, magical results are possible. All existence is the result of vibrations of the elements. All matter consists of cosmic light and sound waves vibrating at different speeds. The pure sound of the element in the elemental composition. Sufis believe that by sound one is able to affect and perhaps control the elements. Elizabeth Gould Davis suggests that ancient women shamans were able to control by group sound the elemental vibrations with very practical results. Indeed, legends from the Near East, Europe, and Britain tell of great stones being raised, huge megalithic structures built by magic use of sound alone. In one legend, large stones are set floating in the air by women playing sacred pipes. Rocking stones poised in such a way that they moved at a touch, perfectly balanced, were used for divination and magic. Oracles, always women, were inspired by the sound of the stones rocking and the energy it generated. Such rocking stones can still be found throughout the countryside of Britain and the Breton coast of France. How were these Cyclopean walls of Jericho and Malta built? Remember, the builders used no metal tools. Remember the recurring images of the goddess, her priestesses and dancers with upraised arms. Perhaps this was the posture of the cosmic moment when the goddess appeared, the moment of simultaneous time, non-time, the moment of simultaneous time slash non-time, when galactic and earth forces fuse and flow together, directed by the human spirit. Women in a dance circle with upraised arms are pictured in Stone Age cave and cliff paintings throughout Europe and Africa, the first homes of humanity. Millennia later, in patriarchal legend, Moses, with supported upraised arms, helped bring victory to the Hebrews. This iconic posture of a power figure with upraised arms supported by the people goes back to the first human experiences of the goddess, and the concept is always related to the fusion of material and spiritual energies in a charged or magic body. The goddess, with upraised arms and parted legs, gave birth to the universe and the world. Ancient images also show her as a magic musician, blowing sacred pipes on conch shells. In the Tanzanian cliff, in the Tanzanian cliff paintings found by Mary Leakey, some estimated to be 29,000 years old, all the groups are dancing women, some carrying musical instruments. A tall, wonderful red ochre piper plays with dashed lines falling from the end of her pipe. A singer's open mouth has the same lines falling from it. These lines are song and could also be rain. A South African bushman painting shows a naked woman in the sky with magic rain-making lines coming from her body, and the rain falling on a reclining woman and a man standing with upraised arms. Ancient rainmaking was a woman's activity, or rain was seen to fall from the woman's body, e.g., the moon. As the possessor of the secret life, woman's music, dancing, and utterance had magic and binding significance, helping to release the life forces not into chaos, but into harmonious activity. Women in their dances imitated the animals, especially birds and snakes, and resonated with natural energies of earth and weather. In women's art and pottery design, also connections were made between meanders, rhythm, music, and dance, rippling waters, the motions of snakes, and water birds. In this way, women originated dance, music, art, and ritual as a magic linking of physical and symbolic forces. Young women of the Bavinda tribe in South Africa identify with the serpent force. Older female initiators kneel in the center as pivots around which the young dancers spiral in the rhythmic coils and undulations of the python. Collapsing and reviving, they rest like the forces of nature in the seasonal round of death and rebirth. Dahomean priestesses in West Coast Africa still perform a very similar python dance as an energy raiser and communication with departed spirits. These women are invoking more than personal fertility. Their dances are ritual linkings, religare, which means to bind, of the individual and tribal energies with the entire musical pulse of the earth and with the dance cycle of cosmic energies. This primordial and continuous linking or symbolic binding always took place within, through, by means of the female body. The health, well-being, and experienced ecstasy of a people depended on the health, well-being, and experienced ecstasy of this female body, of individual women, of Mother Earth, of the cosmic dancing woman. Sufi dervishes claim that their hand clapping, dancing, whirling, and singing are involuntary expressions of the divine power manifesting itself through their bodies. They say this is a way of life handed down from the remotest antiquity. This training in ecstasy was designed to produce the perfect woman or man within this world, not out of it. Sufi dancing is a vehicle for self realization, an experience of the self's joyous union with the larger self of the universe. The dervishes developed their ecstatic rites against the background of a moralistically strict and misogynistic Islam. Were they reconnecting in a patriarchal milieu with ancient matriarchal rites of ecstatic women shamans? Their teaching is based on the concept of essence. He who knows his or her essential self knows God. The dervish is called knower, lover, follower, traveler. Dervish itself means poor man or waiting at the doors of enlightenment. Are Sufis the inheritors of some of the rites of the ancient great goddess? They are. Even as the Essenes were originally ecstatic worshippers in the temple of Artemis at Ephesus. The Sufi ceremonial axe is an Amazonian labrys, a bronze double crescent of the goddess, direct descendant of the double axes used by the priestesses on matriarchal Crete. In Sufi belief, there is a form of superior mental activity available to human beings, and its power can be manifested on the plane of daily life. But most people cannot open to this mental power because our psychic energies are blocked by rigid, conventional, and dualistic thought habits. This super consciousness includes precognition, telepathy, and bilocation, which is the ability to exist in two places at once. Sufis encourage poetic thinking and language and specialize in making startling and cryptic utterances. This has given them a reputation as socially unrealistic, even mad. In fact, they are female. They teach techniques to help free the mind from cultural preconceptions and conditioned ideas, and their methods are not linear and verbal, but multisensory, using auditory, tactile, kinetic sense impacts as well as visuals. Sufis believe that their teachings constitute the inner reality of all religions, the core truths and techniques of all human spiritual psychic experience. And so it seems to be. Elements of their teaching can be found in the early troubadour culture of Europe, in the witch cults and mystic rites of the Knights Templar, in alchemic and Gnostic ideas, i.e., in all those pagan European remnants of the great goddess worship, which the Christian church worked for so many centuries to destroy. Many of the same core techniques are found among Native Americans, Siberian shamanic cultures, Haitian voodoo cultures, and what remains of African magic religion, especially among the Dahomey and other West Coast African goddess people. As Sufis believe in communication without physical presence, they could be spread out everywhere, wandering musical out everywhere. And let me just say that again. As Sufis believe in communication without physical presence, they could be spread out everywhere. Wandering musical Sufi jesters and harlequins in patchwork costumes, traveling on foot from city to city, teaching by songs and cryptic words, sometimes not speaking at all. No matter how much physical distance separates them, all Sufis feel themselves linked by a force they call baraka, meaning grace, lightness, and beauty. In their ecstatic dance rites, Sufi dervishes go into swoons. They sing, sigh, weep, cry, sway from side to side, thrust knives into their flesh, burn themselves in the heat of delirious passion. In the mystic spiral, Jill Peirce describes a dervish dancing in flowing robes. And this is the description. The dervish starts his dance with his arms crossed over his breasts, suggesting a junction in the heart of the descending and ascending vortices, the ancient attitude posture of the goddess. He has his left foot firmly earthed, representing the steel axis. By moving his right foot, he begins like a planet to turn on his own axis while revolving with his fellows around a central sun, the leading dervish. He gradually expands, uncrosses his arms, and lowering his head over his right shoulder, he raises his right arm, of and in consciousness, to receive the divine emanation, and lowers his left to return his gift to the earth. He spins gradually faster, as if by his own revolutions he were connecting heaven and earth by actually turning the spirit through himself and down in the ground, while his axis and heart remain absolutely still, and his own spirit soars to its divine source. The greater his ecstasy, his expansion and speed, the wider his skirt extends. When his arms are both outstretched to heaven, it is as if the union in his heart delineated in its state of contraction, spirit into matter, by his crossed arms, has reached its fullest expression, matter into spirit, by the opposing gyres of arms and skirts, the outer expression of the bliss of the divine union in the very stillness of his heart. If at one point in this dance, with right arm pointing to sky and the left to earth, the dervish seems very much like the magician in the tarot cards, it is because they come from the same place and have the same meaning. The Paleolithic male shaman in animal skins and mask stood in the same posture, holding up the lunar baton de commandment, borrowed from the women's mysteries to be his androgynous ensign of power. This magician's baton, misnamed by a male archaeologist, was a woman's lunar calendar stick, the first time measuring device known, dating from the Ice Age. A male magician or shaman cannot be magic, female, without it. A male magician or shaman cannot be magic, i.e., female, without it. Other forms of ecstatic dancing come down to us from the Near East, Thrace, the Mediterranean, preserved in Greek legend. One of these is the ecstatic dance of the Bachantes, wild women intoxicated by chewing ivy leaves and also the mushroom, sacred to Dionysius. The Bachantes or Thracian Maenads, which they have mad women in quotes and parentheses, were the daughters of the Great Mother, her white wild maids, possessing the magical power to make the whole earth blossom. Rites were performed on mountaintops, and at the touch of these wild women's hands, the original lunar calendar sticks, streams of wine and water, milk and honey broke free and flowed from the rocks. In their ivy-induced fury at the dark of the moon, they would tear any man in pieces who happened to cross their path or enter their sacred precincts. Dionysius himself, who some would call basely effeminate, was torn apart ritually and eaten as a sacrament. In parentheses, this story could apply to the magic mushroom itself, which was called Dionysius. The cult of Dionysius and the wild women was popular with the common people, especially those in the countryside, far into Roman times. Central to this cult were the ancient mushroom mysteries, the communal eating of hallucinogenic psilocybin, called the body of Dionysius, the spotted scarlet flycap, Amanita muscaria, was referred to as Christ's body by Hebrew and early Christian cultists. There is no doubt that all ancient religious experience was associated with, if it did not originate in, hallucinogenic experience, and that this was under the tutelage of women, the great Stone Age pharmacologists. Anthropologist Jacquetta Hawkes also believes that the ecstatic mystery religion of Dionysius, the tender-faced and curly-haired son of the Cretan Great Mother, was originally the cult of the great goddess herself and her wild orgiastic women. When we think of the love and death god Dionysus surrounded by white wild, mad women, oh, our minds fly back immediately to that old Stone Age cave in northeast Spain with a hugely genitaled young man surrounded by a crescent of nine moon faced women all dancing. This was the young man who became the Neolithic sun lover of the goddess and eventually Christ. In Cretan myth, Dionysius was the bisexual son of the mother, raised as a girl among women. Throughout the Near East and the Aegean, he was known by many names: Attis, Adonis, Tammuz, Damuzi, Osiris. Jesus was called Adonai, Lord, after his erotic prototype Adonis. As a vegetation god, he was ritually sacrificed, usually on a tree, prototype of the later crucifix. His flesh was eaten as bread, his blood drunk as wine. Dionysius is the god of the vine, wine, and divine intoxication. This ritual sacrifice in the harvest season was believed to be necessary for the land's fertility. The immortal's son, mortal part, his flesh and blood energies were cut up and sprinkled on the fields. The Christ idea was in no way original with the Hebrews of Bible times, but inherited by them, along with paradise garden myths, flood myths, and an entire birth, death, rebirth ritual cosmology from the entire Neolithic agricultural great goddess religion of the Near East. They added to all this just one new twist: the incorporation of the mother's son into a strictly patriarchal ontology. In the book From Ritual to Romance, English scholar Jesse Weston traced the red thread from these Neolithic mother goddess and son slash lover slash sacrifice god mystery cults into early Christian mysticism and also into pagan European legends of the Grail, the sacred quest, and the healing of the wasteland, which became merged with Christian romance. 20th century poets like T.S. Eliot drew heavily on her discoveries and ideas without giving her much credit, but turned the spirit quest into one of the patriarchal Christian despair and resignation, rather than a courageous and ecstatic return and reintegration with the goddess. Poetry was originally oral, the chant of ecstatic dance and entranced prophecy. Long before the Song of Songs, Near Eastern erotic poetry was the expression of the love cycle of Inanna and Dumuzi, Ishtar and Tammuz, the goddess and her son slash lover. The Song of Songs itself is clearly a pre-patriarchal chant of ecstasy to the Black goddess. Among the North African Berbers and other pre-Islamic Moorish peoples in the religion that is now Morocco and Algeria, it was the women who traditionally made, chanted, and sang the lyric love poetry. This tradition was undoubtedly one spread throughout Western and Northern Africa. According to Briffault in his fascinating book Troubadours, these Moorish women's song forms and erotic love poetries were carried by the Moors into Spain and the French provincial region, and were the seeds of the troubadour tradition that flourished in the Middle Ages. This tradition became European lyric poetry. Next chapter, Earth Spirit, Serpent Spirals, and Blind Springs. And to all ancient people, the earth was alive, a great animal inhabited by a life spirit or soul substance. All phenomena were manifestations of this divine force, and after death, all forms return to this source before passing into another animate existence. The earth spirit was the central transformer of all life energies into the multiplicity of life forms, all protoplasmically connected with each other, as in the same body, the same imagination. In the Gaia hypothesis, Earth is defined as a living, breathing, and corresponding body, creating its own atmosphere, filling its own needs, relieving its own stresses. Far from the patriarchal mechanical model of Earth as a merely passive receiver of stimuli from the sun and sky, this new model shows us an intentional organism exhibiting will and direction and quite capable of reciprocal relations with all its creatures. In the pattern of the past, Guy Underwood tells of his wanderings around Britain in search of ancient roads, animal tracks, stone circles, and other megalithic sites. Underwood, a water dowser, describes the earth force like a magnetic current emitted by underground waters in motion and under pressure. This force is affected by the movements of the stars, the moon, and the sun. In turn, it has great penetrative powers and affects the nerve cells of animals and humans. Modern Western science has not yet begun to study this force, but the Russians seem to be on its track, particularly in their studies of water divining. Generated within the earth, this force causes wave motions perpendicular to the earth's surface. It forms spiral patterns, also mazes and labyrinths, and the spiral coils are based on multiples of seven. When manifested in spiral forms, it was seen as a catalyst with the construction of matter and with generative powers of nature. It was part of the mechanism by which what we call life comes into being. She, the joyous spiral. What Underwood calls primary lines, water lines, aquastats, and track lines were in ancient times considered healing slash holy. They have remained stationary since time immemorial. Among the Celts, Ellen Helena, the goddess of the ancient tracks, was considered the first and oldest of all deities. Animals follow these tracks and use them to find suitable places to sleep and give birth. Migrations of birds and fish also follow these geodetic magnetic lines, finding their way instinctively over vast distances. Most ancient roads were aligned with these irregular and winding animal paths along the underground force lines. Another system of forces contracts and expands daily, making the earth a breathing animal indeed. Underwood found that some of these secondary lines, along with the geospirals, reverse their positions at each phase of the moon every fortnight. The ancient calendar was lunar, and among the Celts, the months commenced on the sixth day after the first new moon, while the year began on the sixth day after the first new moon following the vernal equinox. Each month was divided into two fortnightly periods. It would seem that the Celtic calendar was based upon the phenomena of fluctuation in secondary lines, since this provided an exact time once every fortnight in relation to which dates and times for rituals and religious observances could then be fixed. The spiraling force forms an energy network all over the Earth's surface, affecting the germination and growth of trees and plants, as well as animals. Here's the practical side of goddess mythology and symbolism. The moon, spirals, earth, water, all related to the right time to plant different kinds of seed according to the moon's phases. Further, the magic earth current is known as the serpent force, or in China, the dragon current. Raising the serpent force is a common and ancient rite among Native Americans, Hindus, Asians, Africans, and the Celts of pagan Europe. These sacred serpentine paths were followed instinctively by the first nomadic tribes. Australian Aborigines make ritual journeys along these current paths in steps of the gods who created the original divine landscape. They believe that each place the gods stopped became manifest reality, a spiral center of energy. The dragon, the serpent on legs, was everywhere associated with creation and life giving. As Underwood says, The serpent is the one land living vertebrae which naturally and frequently reproduces all the geodetic spiral patterns. And so it seems reasonable to assume that both the serpent and the spiral are representations of the geodetic spiral. And serpents and spirals were always associated with the goddess. Elethea, Cretan goddess of childbirth, was always accompanied by snakes. The umbilical cord is itself a serpentine connection between the mother and new life. The mythic relation between serpents and earth water is also ancient. Sacred pools and underground springs were always legendary, guarded by magic snakes. A blind spring is a spot from which a number of underground streams flow, forming a radiating pattern of energy. Underwood noted that cows will break out of a field to reach a blind spring and give birth to their young there. This is true of all animal mothers. Perhaps the spiral energy patterns found over blind springs can ease labor and produce healthier offspring. Doubtless, ancient women also sought out the blind spring as a place for childbirth. According to Eric Newman in The Great Mother, the earliest sacred precinct of the primordial age was probably that in which the women gave birth. It is the place where the great goddess rules, and from which, as still in later female mysteries, all males are excluded. Not only is the place of childbirth the sacred place in female life in early cultures, obviously, it also stands at the center of all cults that are dedicated to the Great Mother as the goddess of fertility. The mysterious occurrence of menstruation and pregnancy and the dangerous episode of childbearing make it necessary for the inexperienced women to be initiated by those who are informed in the matters. This precinct is the natural, social, and psychological center of the female group, ruled over by the older, experienced women. The blind spring was the esoteric center of the old religion, as well as being the physical center of its monuments. It was holy, healing ground, a place of harmonious power where the goddess dwelt. Blind springs were to be found at the center of every prehistoric temple, as well as every medieval church in Britain and Europe, according to Underwood. Gates of cities and temples were also set over blind springs, giving divine protection to those entering and leaving. Holy, healing, and oracular wells were sunk on blind springs, and the most ancient cities of the Near East, such as Jericho and Katal Hayuk, were built over such sacred wells. The subterranean well water was medicinal for a short season each year, when the animated spirit traveled through like an electrical current. Stones placed nearby probably served as storage batteries for its magnetic energies. The ancient idea of divine protective sanctity was expressed by encirclement. Monuments were enclosed by protective underground spirals, mirrored above ground in the foundation maze or labyrinth. All burial places were surrounded by underground streams. In mythology and fairy tale, all magic castles are surrounded by a circular moat or a rushing stream, and no magic rite can safely occur unless first a protective circle is drawn around it and the participants. There is a general association of important prehistoric sites, geodetic lines, and underground water. Guy Underwood was a water diviner. This art, along with geodesy, measurement of the Earth's surface, was part of the training of Celtic Druids. It was also practiced by the Scythian Inaers, who were legendary hermaphrodites. They wore women's clothes and received their gifts of divination from Aphrodite. The Druids prophesied with the aid of willow wands, a tree sacred to the moon goddess. The Inaers with a wand made from yew or mountain ash, trees sacred to the death goddess. Both willow and yew are used in water divining. John Mitchell, in The Earth Spirit, theorizes that a stream of life-giving magnetic current passes through the land once a year, following certain paths, the season determined by position of the stars. Legendarily, this super energy transit was described as the god passing through. Sacred calendars related to local topography and myths and customs were based on a once unified system of awareness of the pathways of the earth spirit. Worldwide, the sacred energy pathways were marked by some human means: mounds, banks, ditches, dolmens, menhirs, and stone crosses, stone circles, terraces, and roads. In some places, the energy circuits were known as fairy paths, roads of psychic activity, and local peasant celebrations were timed to coincide with the current's passage. Processional and holy ways were located along raised serpent paths. Stone avenues representing the serpent lead up to Stonehenge, which is an ancient temple of the moon and the serpent. As Mitchell describes it, the mercurial earth current glides toward it like a serpent toward an egg, moving through the earth's crust. All stones in such monuments are believed to have strong healing powers, the rocks and boulders acting as vessels of the vital spirit. In all ceremonies, the goddess was seen to approach her shrine by a particular route. She both followed and made the energy path. Once she was accompanied by her nomadic celebrants. With permanent settlements and agricultures, those sacred journeys were imitated in religious processions. All these ceremonies were intended to energize and harmonize the people, as together they followed the path of the earth's magic life flow. And this is the real difference between ancient science and modern. Modern technologies tend to cut across the lines of the earth force, arbitrarily and unconsciously separating human activities from the earth radiations. I'm sorry, let me say that again. And this is the real difference between ancient science and modern. Modern technologies tend to cut across the lines of the earth force, arbitrarily and unconsciously separating human activities from the energy radiations of the earth. And so setting humans and earth against each other in a force field of antagonistic vibrations. The old science and technology found ways to locate and tap the Earth's natural force flow, integrating human and Earth energies through ritual in a strong, harmonious field. The operating principle, the operating principle of the ancient beliefs was the analogy between macrocosm and microcosm. What was true of the earth body was also true of the bodies of all creatures on earth. And so, analogous with the ancient science of geomancy is another ancient technique, acupuncture. As Michelle writes, Chinese acupuncture treats the human body by regulating the currents of vital energy that flow through the skin, as the geomancer treats the body of the earth. Kirlian photography has shown us that all the ancient acupuncture points are identical with points of great energy explosion on the skin surface. We will find ways to take Kirlian photos of the whole Earth body, the globe's etheric body, and perhaps learn again to follow the energy charged serpent paths to the benefit of all life. It is cosmos to those who know the way, and chaos to those who lose it. Underground caverns and alchemic mysteries. The power and effectiveness of shamans, witches, sibyls, druids emerges from their ability to communicate with the non-human, extraterrestrial and subterranean forces, and the spirit world of the dead. The megalithic chambers of Malta and Gozo were places of such communication. And in Britain, also, there are rumored to be subterranean caverns, chambers of initiation and incantation under Stonehenge, Glastonbury, Tor, and other stone monuments. Underground chambers, called fogu or souterrains, are often found within enclosures of ancient villages in the western parts of Britain and especially in Ireland. There is much speculation about their purpose. Three-dimensional underground mazes called weems were built by the ancient Picts of Scotland. The word weem relates to the word wamba, cave, and also wam, womb. The old English word for womb is wambe. The mysterious Tuatha De Danann, children of the goddess Danu, knew all the magical arts which they brought to Ireland. Driven underground by later Celtic invasions, they are still believed to dwell in earth mounds and are the Irish fairies who serve as communicators of energy between the mortal and invisible worlds. All prehistoric monuments in Britain and globally are associated with the cult of the dead, a very exact ancient science of spiritual invocation and conscious direction of natural forces. The Irish fairy realm is the other world of the Mexican Nagual, the dream time of Australian Aborigines, the summerland of the immortal dead who live on in other dimensions of our total reality. It is the potentia of all possible energy and form. The Tuatha De Danann were also called Aes Sedai. Sedai, oh, as she. Today pronounced it's not it's she pronounced she. So it's spelled Sidhe. Pronounced she Shee is a Gaelic word meaning fairy mound or realm of the magical powers. And it no doubt corresponds to the and it no doubt corresponds to the Hindu yogic term Sidhu, which also means magical or occult powers. Far from being crude and carnal, as Christianity has labeled paganism, the sacred mysteries of antiquity were of a subtle psychic nature, introducing initiates into the invisible world by means of heightened consciousness. In these rites, the human psyche experienced physical death and the transcendent state. In these rites, the human psyche experienced physical death and the transcendent state of future being. The mysteries were enacted in underground chambers from which all light was excluded, built to focus the earth's powerful energies on the chamber and its occupants. Behind this animated current is the mystery hinted at in the catacombs of Eleusis that may not fully be comprehended within the natural limits of human experience. As the child is conceived within the mother's womb, so is the spirit conceived within the subterranean depths. Recent experiments conducted in caves suggest that conditions for ESP, like telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, are more favorable in an underground environment. Perhaps the moist earth, wholly surrounding such caverns, dampens the electromagnetic radiation with which the brain is normally bombarded, allowing the psyche to receive other transdimensional radiations. At any rate, as John Mitchell writes, the oldest branch of alchemy was concerned to bring about the earthly paradise through the fruitful union of cosmic and terrestrial forces. Alchemy, geomancy, astrology were originally united in a system that recognized correspondences between planetary influences and the spirits of the earth's metals. Alchemy was a major continuation of the ancient mysteries and their symbols. The dragon in alchemy represents the flame of spirit, and the dragon's fiery breath signifies transmutation of matter through intense heat. The philosopher's stone was the mystic condition through which all things could be transformed. All modern chemistry has its roots in both practical and philosophical alchemy. Some kind of atomic theory was known to the ancients who, working always by analogy, believed in total correspondence between material and psychic processes, and thus their mutual influence and interaction. In Egypt, and as late as Roman rule there, many of the renowned inventions within the science of alchemy were created by women. Maria, the Jewish in particular, circa 1st century BC, invented practical instruments for laboratory research, including the alchemical steel. She is credited with improving all the essential appliances that would be necessary to alchemical and chemical research for the following 2,000 years. What we have left of alchemy, in addition to modern chemistry, are its symbols of psychic death, change, and rebirth through the process of alternating fusion and dissolution of opposite elements. This is a psychic rite, an earth spirit ritual, retaining much of the ancient goddess mysteries in distilled form within each individual psyche. The tarot cards also retain a pictorial record of these ancient rites of transformation and their process symbols. Next chapter, the goddess at Avebury in Britain. Avebury on the Wiltshire Downs in the south of England was the sacred center of megalithic culture in Britain. Avebury's stone circle is the largest yet found in England. It dwarfs Stonehenge. There are 77 other stone circles on hinges dating from the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age. Avebury was built by pre-Celtic people living in a farming community area, um, circa 2600 BC. For thousands of years before its construction, the entire landscape of the surrounding area, stretching for about 37 miles, had been seen as the outline of the body of the goddess. Every hill, mound, stone, and long barrow was believed to form part of her maternal body. The three stone circles at the Causeway Camp at Windmill Hill nearby predated Avebury by more than 600 years. The Avebury monuments, which include Silbury Hill and West Kennet Long Barrow, form a condensed sequence of visual sculpted images within the center of the larger and more ancient presence. They express together journeys of cosmic range and the entire yearly agricultural cycle within the space of three fields. The monuments are aligned within the pubic triangle of two rivers meeting. These rivers are seen as superhuman bloodstreams gushing from the earth womb of the goddess. Here, every year anew, the goddess was born, grew into maiden and lover, became mother, and finally the old hag of death. The temples were her seasonal reality, and the people moved with her from place to place in rhythm with the changing farming year. Our solar year is divided by solstices and equinoxes, but in the ritual calendar, the quarter days in between were used as the major days and nights of celebration. To the ancients, the lunar and solar manifestations of these days were equally important. The celebration nights fall in early August, November, February, and May on the appropriate lunar phase nearest to the solar quarter day. These are the witches' sabbats of Lammas, Samhain, Imbolc, and Beltane. At the August or summer and February or winter quarter days slash nights, the moon and sun rose and set in alignment with the axis joining the two sacred springs at Avebury. Avebury's circle originally had 98 stones, some up to 18 feet high, enclosing an area of 28 and a half acres. Two smaller circles stand within the larger outer one. The earthworks surrounding the horseshoe or circular space are surrounded by a ditch with a bank beyond. Using only red deer antler picks and shovels made of ox shoulder blades, the people raised the earth bank nearly 50 feet above the ditch bottom, stretching almost a mile in circumference. Two serpentine stone avenues led into the circle. They were 1.5 miles long, 50 feet wide, and were defined by 100 pairs of stones set at intervals of 80 feet. In shape, the stones were broad-hipped and long forms of the goddess, alive and powerful in her stance. The Christian church began its long fight against the Avebury stones in 634, smashing them or exorcising them with the sign of the cross. Both inner circles were destroyed sometime after 1700, and many of the other stones were demolished or simply buried. This was at the height of the witch hunts, and these ritual stones of the goddess, just like her priestesses, the witches, were actually tortured and exorcised by Christian priests. The stones were burnt, chipped, mutilated. The institution of private property finally brought about the end of the sacred stones with the enclosure of common land by private wealthy farmers. The emergence of the landless proletariat and the modern notion of individual progress at the expense of the community fittingly coincided with the fall of the Great Mother at Avebury. Of the original stones in West Kennett Avenue, 72 were left in 1722. By 1934, only 4 were still standing, with 9 left fallen. In 1937, a Scots industrialist bought up the land, restored the ditch and earthworks, which had been serving as a rubbish dump, and dug up and reinstalled 43 of the buried megaliths. The long Avebury avenues represented the bisexual snake dragon goddess female and male in one. The West Kennedy Avenue originated at the Serpent's tail end from the sanctuary, once a circular temple labyrinth of complex timber structures covered with a conical roof. This might have been the puberty temple where young women of the community were initiated into the mysteries of farming, sexuality, and childbirth in the springtime season of plowing and preparation of the seedbed. The young woman re-entered her womb within the sanctuary, which is Silbury Hill, at a different season. Here, the goddess is the hibernating spring quarter serpent, just reawakening from her long winter death sleep. On February 1st, at Imbolc, the Feast of Lights were celebrated. Torches carried processionally in the night to help the goddess return from the underworld and to be reborn again. At the tail end of Beckhampton, Stone Avenue, with its more phallic-shaped stones, was the male counterpart to the sanctuary, doubtless a temple for male initiation. Avebury Circle is where the young women and men met after dancing and winding their way up the avenues in imitation of the serpent at midnight of the waxing moon of the May quarter day. This stone circle forms both an enlarged cunt and a great head, the inner circles forming the lunar and solar eyes. It is also a world island surrounded by the cosmic ocean, and its hidden power and secret is the sacred underground water that seeps into the ditch in the spring. Here the unborn fetuses dwell. Avebury Henge was the goddess of love incarnate, the proper place of conception. Here was celebrated the communal yearly May festival wedding in orgiastic rites, the entire community dancing with upraised arms on the outer banks in imitation of the horned new moon. This was Beltane. The maiden becomes a mother, and so the next stage of the cycle was centered at Silbury Hill, the pregnant womb of the goddess, the creation crone. Here, as already described, the people gathered on the summit on the night of the full moon at Lammas, the August quarter day/night, to watch the harvest child being born. With oncoming winter, the goddess becomes the lady of the tombs, the hag of death, the mother of the dead. Her dwelling is now at West Kennett Long Barrow, where she retreats into the underworld after Samhain or Halomas. This barrow is 340 feet long and shaped in her gigantic image. The image of the Silbury mother is repeated within the chambers that represent vagina, birth passage, and uterus, but here is made hollow to receive the dead who were buried within her in fetal position. The 30 chamber stones of West Kennett might form a lunar monthly count. There is no water associated with this barrow, no spring, no stream. All is dryness and barrenness. There are only rivers of stone. West Kennett Long Barrow was built in 3500 BC. It is a Stone Age horned grave slash tomb slash womb slash temple, and it is older than Avebury and Silbury Hill. The people were buried within it collectively without distinction of class or hierarchy. It was ritually frequented by the living as well as by the dead. Megalithic culture is far older than once supposed. Traces of a megalithic farming community have been found in County Tyrone, Ireland, dating from 4500 BC. Patriarchal Bronze Age culture was first brought to Britain circa 2000 BC by the taller, warlike, and aggressive Beaker people. In 2600 BC, the entrance to the West Kennet Long Barrow was sealed off with huge megaliths or great stones. These stones formed the body of an ox. The goddess was moon and ox, one and bisexual. She is the ox lady. She emerges miraculously out of death through the sacred bull. There was continued veneration of the tomb during late Neolithic culture. On Samhain in November, the winter quarter day, a winter eve ox was sacrificed here on the night of the no moon. The ox was ridden by the queen of death, and this ox is miraculously reborn with the spring. The winter goddess lived on in folk memory as Black Anise. She was remembered as a great mountain builder and was a gigantic hag. There are also sacred hills in Ireland named for her, the Paps of Anu or Anu's breasts. Pervading all the earthworks and stoneworks of Avebury was the desire to be close to the earth. The people drew strength from her in birth, in life, and death, and in death. The monuments were clearly the monuments could clearly not have been built with slave labor, but were the love labor of farmers, women, and men who were in tune with great psychic physical powers. To carry through such a task, they lived a peaceful existence. Perhaps natural magic energy was released from the earth and used on an everyday basis by the people. Ancient myths of the dragon serpent guarding a mysterious and symbolic treasure perhaps refer to lost secrets of crop fertility, a hidden power running infertility currents through the countryside. The story goes that anyone who tastes the dragon's blood becomes at one with nature and forever understands the songs of the birds. Perhaps this is the bloodstream of the mother gushing from the earth at sacred wells. The ancients knew that some wells and stones drunk or touched or embraced in a certain way and at certain times of the year could regenerate and revitalize people and animals. Sacred stones seem to contain and emit a force that periodically waxes and wanes. Beneath each active standing stone, there appears to be a crossing of underground water streams. The movement of water through a tunnel of earth, particularly through clay soil, creates a small electrical field for which the stone acts as an amplifier. When this energy power emerges from the ground, it does so in the form of a spiral ascending in seven coils, the lowest two beneath the ground. This is not a stable phenomenon, but waxes and wanes, changing polarity every month. After waning, it dies away for a few days and then waxes in the opposite direction. It cyclically increases and decreases until the end of the lunar phase. The study of the moon's orbit was essential to megalith builders, the people of the moon, the stones, the serpent goddess. The stones might also have functioned as a means of communication over long distances, since the magnetic force that activates the stones also links them in a continuous chain of vibrations. The ley lines, paths for the force, interlock in a cobweb of stones, circles, mounds, and barrels all over the earth. But the stone circles would not have been fully activated unless the calendrical events were accompanied by human rituals and dance, sometimes sacrifice, which focused the forces and fixed them in the stones. Fire, like water, was essential to the workings of the monuments and their hidden power. At May Day slash night was the moment when Beltane fires were lit from hilltop to hilltop to celebrate the coming of the new moon. On May Day, the people drank from the sacred well and circled it 9 times. The May Day sunrise links Avebury in a direct line with Glastonbury Tor some 40 miles away. Glastonbury looks as human-made as Silbury Hill, but it was actually shaped by volcanic rock violently thrown into the sky in an otherwise flat and marshy land. Glastonbury's spiral path, however, was molded by human hands. It is a three-dimensional labyrinth, rising up the Tor in 7 circuits. Nearby is Sacred Chalice Well, anciently called Blood Well because of its miraculously healing red-stained waters. Not far from Glastonbury is Wookie Hole, an ancient cave where the rites of the winter/death goddess were probably enacted. According to the myth, in this cave lived a terrible and bloodthirsty witch who demanded human sacrifice. She was supposedly finally exorcised by a Christian monk from Glastonbury. The persistent British myth of the slumbering giant Albion and the return of King Arthur and the Golden Age is really the legend of the reemergence of the goddess and her people, the great mother and cosmic harmony we lost with Avebury. Today, we live truly in the mythic wasteland of patriarchy, awaiting her rebirth and return with the spring of re-emerging women cultures. Next chapter, Moontime, the great intellectual triumph of women's culture. To interpret the flow of terrestrial magnetism, the dragon current, the serpent path, it is also necessary to watch the night sky. Night to ancient people was not an absence of light or a negative darkness, but a powerful source of energy and inspiration. As night cosmos reveals herself in her vastness, the earth opens to moisture and germination under moonlight, and the magnetic serpentine current stirs itself in the underground waters, just as the thick, snaky sprays of stars, the Milky Way, winds across the night sky. Moon phases are a part of the great cosmic dance in which everything participates. The movement of the celestial bodies, the pulse of tides, the circulation of blood and sap in animals and plants. Observation of the night sky, of the stars, and especially of the moon, was the beginning of mathematics and science. Stonehenge, on Salisbury Plain, 16 miles south of Silbury Hill, does not exist in isolation. Its structure also represents a seasonal and human life cycle. It was probably the center or head of an earlier, much larger configuration of long barrows that together portrayed the squatting goddess. The Avebury monuments in Stonehenge, taken together, as Michael Dames says, may have been arranged to share and perfect the celestial environment, just as they share the river Avon. Stonehenge was elaborated over a long period of generations and was rebuilt many times. Stonehenge 1 is contemporary with Silbury. It consists of the earthworks of the Outer Banks and the 56 Aubrey holes. Its 4 station posts are in lunar and solar alignments. The latitude of Stonehenge is practically optimum for moon/sun rectangular alignment. The Midsummer Sunrise stones in the West Kennet Avenue at Avebury and the Heel stone at Stonehenge were both erected circa 2600 BC. The function of the Aubrey holes was to predict lunar eclipses. It is infinitely more difficult to study the orbit of the moon than that of the Earth around the sun. The moon describes an arc around the Earth that varies from month to month. The arc is slightly tilted in such a way that over a period of 18.6 years, the moon first rises and sets very far in the north and south, and then it gradually moves its rising and setting points, its rising and setting points further inwards from these extreme positions. After 9.3 years, it begins to move back again, retracing its steps. We now know that the megalithic stone circles of England and Brittany were, among other things, giant observatories. Running its dimensions through computers, modern astronomers have confirmed that Stonehenge was used to calculate the solstices, equinoxes, and future eclipses of sun and moon. Some have called it a solar temple, but the major concern of the megalith builders seems to have been precise observation of the moon. The moon's eclipse cycle is measured by a period of 18.61 years. The 56 Aubrey holes are set to mark this cycle over a period of time, 19 plus 19 plus 18 years. More remarkable, many of the stone circles and alignments throughout Britain were built to calculate precisely the slight periodic 9-foot oscillation of the moon, its wobble of amplitude 9 feet or 0.15 degrees. The period of this tiny wobble is 173.31 days, or half an eclipse year. Such accurate knowledge of this small lunar oscillation, familiar to Neolithic moon people, was lost to the Western world and not discovered until Tycho Brahe's observations in the 16th century. The moon's wobble was known and accurately measured by ancient Arabic astronomers whose traditional knowledge was not destroyed by Christian book burnings, library razings, and persecutions of intelligence. The Mayans observed it also. At this point, let's quote Pliny, a writer of the first century AD. True it is, I confess, that the invention of the ephemerides to foreknow thereby not only the day and night with the eclipses of sun and moon, but also the very hours, is ancient. Howbeit, the most part of the common people have been and are this opinion, that all the same is done by enchantments, and that by the means of some sorceries and herbs together, both sun and moon may be charmed and enforced both to lose and recover their light. To do which feat women are thought to be more skillful and meet than men. And to say a truth, what a number of fabulous miracles are reported to have been wrought by Medea, queen of Colchis, and other women, especially by Circe, our famous witch here in Italy, who for her singular skill that way was canonized a goddess. The charming of sun and moon to lose and recover their light refers, of course, to eclipses, and apparently the knowledge needed to predict them, including the ephemeris tables, originated with women and with a female cosmology dating far back into the Stone Age. The chalk banks of Stonehenge Avenue meander for nearly 2 miles from the river Avon to the Henge. There was even an enclosure nearby, very much like the Avebury Sanctuary. It is called Woodhenge, and its egg-shaped ring has 5 concentric circles. At Stonehenge 1, in the concentric circles of Ditch, Bank, and Aubrey holes, the image of the eye goddess was created. At Stonehenge 2, which was 2000 BC to 1800 BC, the station posts are still standing. A half circle of vulva shape, design was created with precious blue stones brought from the Preseli Mountains in Wales, more than 100 miles away. That part of Wales was itself an ancient sacred center of the Celtic goddess Ceridwen, abounding with stone circles. The blue stones are about 6 to 8 feet high, delicately colored and finely shaped. Nearby stands Pentry Han, the large gateway cromlech anciently called the womb of Ceridwen by the Druids, originally covered by an egg-shaped earth mound. It was a dark interior space where Druids practiced initiation rites. Stonehenge is precisely positioned so that the distant hills align astronomically with the great stone arches. It was built to keep the rhythm of the agricultural year in synchronization with the movements of the astronomical year. Even in historic times, according to Michael Dames, the stones were still related to the wheat harvest. In folk memory and custom, the stones could be counted correctly only by laying a loaf of bread beside each stone. The 30 upright stones of the Starson Circle probably represented the 29.5 days of the lunar month, with the smallest stone as the half day. In the final version of Stonehenge, built by the Beaker people, the blue stones were repositioned. The new feature is the unique use of stone lintels. Perhaps at this point, the alignment was turned more specifically into the solar temple that most male historians and writers so urgently want to find there. But even from this later Beaker period, goddess carvings are found on the stones. It is possible that the elevation created by the later trilithons was trodden at the first fruits ceremony, people climbing up by ladders or scaffolding. What appears to be a libation bowl carved with goddess eyes is sunk into the upper surface of the great trilithon lintel. Stonehenge is very majestic, but harsh and gloomy. Avebury is open, deeply maternal in feeling, and the heart of a beautiful rolling countryside, which is presumably why Avebury was condemned to oblivion for centuries until rescued in the 1930s. And there was no thorough written account of Avebury between 1743 and 1977. Stonehenge, as soon as it was described as a solar temple, took all the attention and later became particularly popular as a Druid temple. The megalithic stone circles were used for the most delicate lunar observations. Alexander Thom, a British civil engineer who measured hundreds of megalithic sites, believes that all the impressive alignments in Britain were lunar. The geometry of the stone circles is derived from the extreme positions of the moon, stars, and sun as they cross the horizon. In particular, the moon could be measured against the distant hill slope with all the lunar backsites marked by the tallest stones. The great 60-foot high menhir near Carnac in Brittany, when viewed from other megalithic sites, acted as a marker of extreme positions in the moon's orbit. And this lunar observatory stone dates from 4,000 years ago. Lunar sites, according to Tom, were often built in very remote and inaccessible places, particularly along the wild coasts of Britain and France and in northern Scotland. Night after night, the ancients used foresights on the great horizon cycle to calculate a curve on the ground, marking positions with stakes or rods. Stepping back each night, the curve obtained on the ground is, to a smaller scale, a graph of the moon's declination plotted on a time base. Tom notes that the megalithic people were mariners, traveling the seas to the far ends of the Scottish Isles and further. Sailors in those dangerous waters needed some means of predicting tides. Knowing from lunar observations when to expect an eclipse, they could then calculate the resultant direction and violence of the tides. There is no longer any doubt about the advanced astronomical nature of these lunar observatory sites. What no one mentions is that women were the first observers of lunar cycles. As the first agriculturalists, women related moon phases to planting and reaping times. Even earlier, women watched the moon to know the optimal time to conceive, to abort, to give birth. It is women who live the lunar cycles in our bodies. Becoming and changing are the lunar order of things. The moon exerts an identical influence on the magnetic serpent current in the earth, the tides of the sea, and the women's menstrual flow. The lunar body is mirrored in nature and it synchronizes with the flow of the menstrual blood. Okay, I'm wondering if I should just do one more chapter because, yes, it looks like we're getting, I think I want to just go ahead and close it out because then we get into moon mines and that's going to be really deep. So I'm going to go one final chapter. Okay. Lunar calendars. The first engraved rocks and stone tools yet found date from 300,000 BC. This was at the very beginning of Homo sapiens during the early Neanderthal period in second interglacial Europe. These permanently marked stones are believed to be time markers, moon time markers, and were without doubt engraved by females. So early, as Thompson notes, the human is miniaturizing her universe into symbolic form. Thousands of similar pieces of stone and bone have been found dating from the later Old Stone Age, circa 30,000 BC. These are marked with long and often complex sequences of notches and scratches, an elaboration of the earliest Neanderthal engraved stones. Many prehistorians have dismissed these marks as decorations. Does this sound familiar by now? But Alexander Marshak, an American archaeological writer, decided to study these marks systematically under a microscope. He found the signs to be deliberately made, the tiny grooves cut in differing depths, widths, and shapes. Scratches on one pebble or bone were made with differently shaped tools. Marshak concluded that the marker changed to a new tool, often cutting at a new angle, with each change of moon phase. One piece of bone records 6 months on one side, 6 months on the other. This system had been undergoing refinement since the Neanderthal engraved rocks of 300,000 BC. It was a complicated notation for recording factual data, timekeeping, phase, and cycle marking, and it was in use in Europe tens, indeed hundreds of thousands of years before what is called true writing appeared in the Near East sometime in the late 4th millennium BC. This notation and the lunar calendar it recorded was the invention of women. Marshak has studied another form of timekeeping, the lunar calendar stick. Originally, perhaps carved from bone, later of wood, the sticks were an elaborate record of the lunar year. One such calendar stick that Marshak spotted in an 1828 portrait of a Winnebago chief was 53 inches long with four sides or faces. Vertical marks are etched into it at regular intervals. Above them are small crescents and dots. These sticks were complex lunar tally sticks that marked the lunar year, brought the lunar year into phase with the solar year, and noted the times of rituals. So far, Marshak has found at least 5 calendar sticks from 3 different Native American tribes. Such sticks appear in Paleolithic cave paintings dating from 50,000 BC. They are held by women and shamans and later became the magician's wand. Abe named this stick Le Baton de Commandment, suggesting it was an insignia of male rulership or power. But in fact, as a lunar measuring instrument, the stick derives from women's earliest moon phase engravings on rock and bone. In Thompson's words, the owner of the baton is not man, the mighty hunter, but the midwife. The midwife, of course, because it was her job and the job of every pregnant woman to know exactly when babies were due. Anthropologists have described the keeping of lunar calendars, specifically by women, among Australian Aborigines, 6 Siberian tribes, and the Yurok Indians of North America. Australian women used notched sticks. Among past and present day Siberians, um, pregnancy has the duration of exactly 10 lunar months. And it has always been women who kept the lunar calendars, marking those months off toward a safe full-term birth. Yurok women kept menstrual calendars and were certainly typical in this of other Native American women of both hemispheres. The Yurok count was kept by dropping a month stick each lunar month into a second basket until they reached a count of 10. With this method, they could predict births to within a day, a crucial accuracy among early hunting and gathering people on the move. The count was also useful in connection with abortion. As Thompson says, it is perfectly reasonable to assume that menstruation, lunar calendars, and midwifery are as much or more at the foundation of human science than man, the great killer, so celebrated by the macho anthropologists. And in fact, this does make sense, the kind of clear, simple sense that is so easily overlooked. The biblical idea that humanity began with a crime of disobedience is wrong. The capitalist Darwinian notion that human intellect begins with a clever act of self-interested murder and plunder and self-aggrandizement is wrong. The macho anthropological belief that human life and the human brain evolved through the inventions, discoveries, and experiences of the male hunter alone is all wrong. Human life begins with birth, and human culture and intelligence began with birth, with the female's experiences of surviving pregnancy and bearing children and keeping them alive. The possession by the Winnebago Indian chief of a lunar calendar stick as part of his insignia of power, along with an axe and a neck pendant, shows that this ruling power derives from the ancient time of female power. Thompson again points out that priests and shamans must always dress as women to take on women's original magic, and that Aboriginal men worldwide were put through imitation childbirth and menstruation rituals for the purposes of initiation. The fact that the baton was taken over by men in the militarist cultures of patriarchal civilization may, in fact, indicate that they took it over because it was a most ancient symbol of feminine power. So, at the very beginning of the Upper Paleolithic, women, Neanderthal women, apparently knew that lunar periods were of a certain length, were repeated regularly, and that the phases were roughly predictable within a day or two. Cro-Magnon women in 30,000 BC had formed a conception of a lunar year and were working out a lunar calendar. By the end of the Paleolithic age, they could predict the seasons of the year, the phases of the moon, the annual migrations of animal, birds, and fish. When Neolithic people settled in village sites, they began building their calendars, stone circles that were to be used for lunar and solar observations as well as religious ceremonies. Or perhaps it was the other way around. Perhaps the ceremonial observatories, these power centers formed of fixed points of stone, were the loci that gave rise to the settled farming communities that replaced the nomadic food gatherers and hunters. It is not far-fetched to think women invented symbolic and abstract notation, observational science, and early mathematics. Early women's thought processes, early men's too, were still organic, still rooted in nature and practical experience, not alienated or born of a desire to conquer the natural world, and from a real integral observance of the needs and rhythms. Let me just say that again. Organic, rational thought emerged from a desire to cooperate with the natural world and from a real integral observance of the needs and rhythms of the personal self and the human community. It also emerged from a mind free of the inhibitions, blocks, and dogmas imposed by later patriarchal religions and cultures. The implications of this association of women and the moon would suggest that women were the first observers of the basic periodicity of nature, the periodicity upon which all later scientific observations were made. Woman was the first to note a correspondence between an internal process she was going through and an external process in nature. Woman was the first to note a correspondence between an internal process that she was going through and an external process in nature. She is the one who constructs a more holistic epistemology in which subject and object are in sympathetic resonance with one another. She is the holistic scientist who constructs a taxonomy for all the beneficial herbs and plants. She is the one who knows the secrets of the time of their flowering. The worldview that separates the observer from the system he observes, that imagines that the universe can be split into mere subjectivity and real objectivity, is not of her doing. She expresses The witness of the body that Whitehead tried to rediscover in his philosophy. I'm sorry. She expresses the witness of the body that Whitehead tried to rediscover in his philosophy of organism and process. Here is the philosophy that stood before the speculations of the Presocratics. She is the Holy Mother Church, which Descartes challenged when he cut the umbilical cord between philosophy and the church and split reality into res extensa and res cogitans. The reason the Venus of La Sol or the modern Virgin of Guadalupe are pictured with the crescent moon is that woman and the moon are a single mystery. This mystery is and was a reality, and all original real mystery was observed, studied, pondered, and participated in by original real human beings. Mystery was not used as a tool of fear or oppression, of obfuscation and power, but was used gratefully as ceremonial food by the evolving human intelligence, led by the observational intelligence of women. In the Woman's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets, Barbara G. Walker reminds us that my thesis, means mother wisdom and originally referred to divination by the stars. Worldwide, in ancient and modern languages, the word Ma means mother. The first astrologers and mathematicians, meaning learned mothers, were women. The Lunda people of African Angola tell of a girl who discovered a method for measuring long distances in boundary disputes. In her daily tasks, she wove wickerwork doors for huts from leather strips, measuring them a thumbnail wide. She noticed that an ox hide could be cut into a continuous strip to cover a great distance, and that all ox hides produced strips of similar length. So she suggested the strips be used as standard units of measurement by her tribe. Certainly, measuring amounts of stored food and estimating how much could be used on a daily basis to feed a certain number of people through the lean months of the agricultural year gave Neolithic women profound experience in mathematical calculation. Life depended on it. Geometry and the human image were originally two expressions of the same divine image, the body of the universe. Number emerged from sensory matter. To the ancients, number was always founded in real and concrete human experience, and it did not possess abstract universality or objectivity. The megalith yard of the stone monument builders was 2.72 feet, the measurement of the human stride. Throughout classic antiquity measurements, throughout classic antiquity, measurements were based primarily on parts of the human body, e.g., the foot, the hand span, the finger joint. The Chinese word for mathematics, swan, is no older than Confucius, circa 600 BC. Units of linear measure were codified into abstractions gradually, a process perhaps begun in Babylon circa 2500 BC. In Western artistic creation, we have inherited a tradition of ideal forms and measurements that uses a numerical system exploited during the European Renaissance. This tradition can be traced back to Pythagoras, who developed a kind of mathematical mysticism out of megalithic philosophy. He acquired his knowledge and perhaps his methods also from Thracian wise women. Pythagoras, like mathematicians after him, came to believe that mathematics is not just a language describing nature, but is inherent in nature. All things are numbers. Numbers are the first principle, indeed, the very elements of the things of nature. Thus, for the Western world, a description was abstracted from substance and deified into an objective system. Thus, Pythagoras introduced logical reasoning rather than organic reasoning into the domain of religion and ritual, laying the foundations for the later intellectual theology of Christian scholars and the Western world in general. This combination of mathematics and theology characterizes religious philosophy in classic Greece, in medieval Europe, in Reformation and modern times. Consequently, God was no longer intuition or ecstatic vision, not profound ontological experience, but a kind of rational machine explained by a few scholarly men. Philosophy and shared, oh, I'm sorry, by a few scholarly men. Plato, Saint Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Descartes, all inherited this numerical philosophy and shared a logical admiration of the timeless and static, utterly transcendent and aloof, pure spirit of the Father God. Utterly abstracted from flesh and earthly cyclicity, this Father God was an unappealable, was, no, let's say that again. Utterly abstracted from flesh and earthly cyclicis, uh, utterly abstracted from flesh and earthly cyclicity, this Father God was an unappealable, was, mm, I'm almost done. Let's say this one last time. Utterly abstracted from flesh and earthly cyclicity, this Father God was as unappealable as pure number. Pure number is always elevated above the messy world of mere life. During 300 years of witch hunts in Europe, this rationalistic theology was used as a legal and clerical weapon against what still remained of the ancient women cultures. Medieval scholiasts not only debated endlessly and in dead earnest about how many angels could dance on the head of a pin during obscene torture, priests and civil judges also hounded their female victim with obsessive questions about the precise number of imps she employed, the total number of times she had intercourse with the devil, the exact size and length of his member, and so forth. The dogmatic insistence on number was supposed to cast an aura of rationality and objectivity around their otherwise bizarre and sick proceedings. In modern forms, e.g., psychological measurements, behavioral norms, notions of quantifiable sanity and adjustment, deified number is still used as a power tool against social deviance. In contrast, Eastern mysticism, like European pagan orientation and primal orientation everywhere, understands mathematics as one part of our conceptual map, a means of apprehending one part of reality, but not an abstractable feature of reality itself. Reality is undifferentiated, constantly moving and cyclic like the moon. And we are going to stop there. Next chapter being Moon Mines. It was really get great reading. I thought I would just do a little bit more reading since it was me to get, again, to get through this book. It's pretty lengthy, you know? So hope you enjoyed. Ankh Uja Seneb. Peace, blessings to you all.